Swan was not always a monster. He was originally Edgar Swan, a low-level institute worker who found himself on the wrong side of the law after stealing cigarettes. He believed his trial worked out in his favor, offered, quote, probation in the form of living in isolation for a month, provided with food, water, and shelter, only requiring him to write a journal. Unbeknownst to Swan, he had been infected with FEV, and the probation he accepted was a ruse to observe the effects. By the 6th day, Swan realized something was wrong when the scientists returned for additional tests. His body ached and he felt jittery and agitated. His mind was racing and he felt he could hardly write. He knew that the scientists had done something to him, but was not aware of what it was. 2 weeks into the experiment, Swan's condition stabilized and improved by all accounts. He had experienced a threefold increase in muscle mass and a major increase in intellectual capacity. Swan was now privy to the experience in its entirety, but was enthusiastic about it, even having applied to the research team, anticipating assisting in his own experiment. However, Swan found by the 3rd week of the experiment his mental faculties were backsliding. He experienced seizures and returned to the observation lab. He understood that his prognosis was poor, and he learned that the viral strain he was infected with is fundamentally unstable. His health rapidly deteriorated, and he knew that the seizures were only the beginning of the side effects he would endure. He anxiously waited to discover his own fate, worrying the scientists would reject him as they had done for so many others. Swan's fears of being exiled to the Commonwealth were realized, and he eventually made his way to Boston Common, an abandoned park in the downtown ruins, where he made his home in the groundskeeper's shack. It was here that he finally lost his mind to mutation, eventually creating armor from the ruined swan boats of the pond, having turned into a super mutant behemoth by 2287. His experiment logs are found scattered around his living area. The area in which Swan lives is considered extremely dangerous, and wastelanders avoid it at all costs. Makeshift signs warn of his presence as one approaches Boston Common. Raiders chasing the sole survivor will refuse to advance into Boston Common. The bodies of victims who did not heed the warning are strewn around the area. Swan has a schedule that is uncommon for scripted characters. Around 1 a.m. to approximately 5:30 a.m., he roams around the edges of the pond. The rest of the day he spends submerged in the water. Unlike normal behemoths, Swan is wearing makeshift armor created from the swan boat fragments, and thus has good damage resistance and energy resistance. Like all super mutants, he is immune to radiation damage, as well as having 100 resistance against poison damage. Swan has a relatively short range he will travel before stopping. If the player character is beyond this range, Swan will only be able to fight the player character by throwing rocks. If the player character travels beyond Swan's throwing range, he will return to his position submerged in the pond. Noted beside his concept art in The Art of Fallout 4, his face paint is described as Juggalo Mutant.